Hi, I'm Alice the Fabric Ninja. Let's do some Cricut quilting. Today we are going to be making this evergreen tree, either in this big size, which you can use for a pillow or a trivet, or in this small coaster size. You can make this tree look just generally wintry, or you can make it look downright Christmassy, depending on the fabrics you choose. This is the 12-inch size, and it's perfect for little kids to cuddle, makes an adorable decoration, and it can either become a pillow or it can be flat to be used as a trivet. If you prefer a beefier pillow, you can include the borders that come with the pattern, and that is a really great size for the more oversized couches and chairs that we have in a lot of our homes. Whatever size you like, there's going to be one that'll fit it just fine. And it has this lovely envelope back, so you can use another pillow right inside of it and just decorate for the holidays. You don't have to have all of that extra storage space for your holiday stuff. Just stick one of your other pillows inside of it for the season. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, or the fabric in the room. We are going to be cutting out fabric with our Cricut machine. Maker or Explore series, it can cut fabric. But before I go too far, I do want to tell you that you can also get this design over here for free by joining my mailing list. I have it in the 15-inch pillow here. You can see how it's a bit beefier. And I also have coasters, which are the 5-inch size, and I have them in 4 different leaf colorings. So you can have a whole forest going on around your home. Just sign up for my email newsletter and you'll be able to download this pattern for free. The primary material that we're using today is quilting fabric. You can see it on the walls behind me. If you go into Joann Fabrics or another quilting shop, there's just going to be rows and rows and rows of it. You can use pretty much all of that. It's going to feel like a heavier weight dress shirt when you touch it. That's a good idea to tell you whether you have what you want in your hand. The other materials that you're going to be using is some batting. I like using 100% cotton batting, but you can also use polyester, whatever works for you. I just like it really rather thin because I'm not making a quilt here. It doesn't need to keep me warm. I just want to give my quilting something to show up against. For this project, you'll need 3 greens, a brown, and a background color. These are my fabrics. Now it's time for the computer part. Here is the zip file for this project. And because it's a zip file, you need to unzip it or extract it. I'm going to right click and press extract all. It's going to let me pick where I want it to go, but I'm just going to let it put it right with the downloads folder where my other item is. Press extract and it is going to auto open that folder, but you can see back here, it is literally just sitting next to where the other one was. There are currently 5 items in this folder. However, there might be an additional 1 or 2 when you get it. We have our instructions here that will tell you how to make the project. We have an image. Some people like to pin this image, and it's also super useful to print out. Then we have our 3 SVG files. Your icon may look slightly different than mine, and that's okay. We have a 5-inch, a 12-inch, and a 15-inch. The 5-inch makes a coaster. The 12-inch and 15-inch make either a trivet or a pillow. During this workshop, I'm going to be using the 5-inch pattern primarily. However, the 12-inch and the 15-inch patterns have some additional pieces. I have opened up the 15-inch file so I can show you what's a little bit different. The 5-inch file will also have the binding pieces, but it will not have sashing or the pillow envelope back. The sashing is only in the 15-inch file because it takes the 12-inch block to a 15-inch block, and the pillow envelope back is specific for the size of the pillow. When you have these options, you will need to decide whether you're going to bind the edges or do the envelope back. You only need to pick one or the other. So let's head back to our coaster. So you are going to open up Cricut Design Space. Once you've opened Cricut Design Space, press New Project in the upper right-hand corner. Then it may take a moment to load. On the left-hand side, we have the Upload button. Then you're going to press Upload Image, Browse, and head on over to where you have your object. Mine is in Downloads inside this folder. Then you're going to choose the project you're working on, the 5-inch, 12-inch, or 15-inch. We're going to do the 5-inch, and then I press Upload. Then I'm going to select it. It'll have a circle around it. Then I press Add to Canvas. Here is your file. I have instructions on the side here to help you out as you're going. Our first instruction is to check the size. It should be 28 inches wide and 22 inches tall. On the top here, you can see that it is the same size, so we're good to go. The next step is to press Ungroup. So we have all the pieces individually on here now. So let me talk about how this is laid out. We have our instructions over here. Then we have an example block. Then we have groups with all of the different colors laid out. We have our background on the top, the 3 shades of green, our brown, and then we have the large piece for the back and the binding pieces. Anything you don't want to use, like the backing or binding, you can, of course, hide it or delete it. Our next step is to adjust any of the colors that you want. Zooming out here, I want to show you how you would do that. For example, something that you might really want to change is the background color. So on the side, I'm going to select the group that has all the white pieces in it, and then I'm going to go over here and change it to whatever my background color will be. This also helps you see what it will be in the end, but I'm going to actually keep it white. If you want to change the color of individual pieces, you're going to have to wait until the next step. Next up, we have Ungroup All Groups. Excellent, we can do that. On the side here, I'm just going to go down, and every time I get to a new group, we're going to press Ungroup. And let's go read the next instruction. Highlight and delete this white background square. Well, that's easy to do now. And then we're going to highlight and delete the example block. It's just a color tool. I want to make that very clear. If you cut out these pieces here, it's not going to end up being the right size. These triangles in particular need to be larger because we have to sew seam allowance off of them. So please just take this and delete it or hide it so you don't get confused. Whoops, I tried to delete part of my tree. Let's just take this part here. Next up, I am going to show you how you would change an individual piece. For example, here's the background square. If you want to change that piece, it's best to have everything ungrouped already. I'm going to make mine red. And then I am going to make these binding pieces my middle green instead of the dark green, just because I like it. There we go. So those are the changes that I'm making. You can, of course, recolor this in any way you want, or leave it as is. Next up is attaching. So we're going to go over to these triangles. We're going to highlight 2 in a set that would create a square, and we're going to attach them to each other. We do this so that we don't waste materials. Cricut likes spreading things out, particularly when they're nested like this, and would use a lot more materials than we will use pressing attach. If you don't attach them though, that's fine. You'll just use some more materials. If you are using the bonded fabric option, you may wish to also attach these little rectangles together, or even sets of squares. Because you're going to need a little bit more room between all your pieces, it will save you some time later if you just attach things now, and it will keep the spacing proper for you later. Let's check those instructions for final notes. Duplicate. If you wish to cut the quilt batting out with your Cricut, you can duplicate the large square. You can really only cut quilt batting out with a Cricut maker, and most people aren't going to want to do that. So I have not included that in the pattern, but you can always duplicate it to do that. And last, delete these instructions. And now it's time to make it. So we have a lot of different mats here. That's perfect, or you can of course move things from mat to mat. But what I want to point out here is first the spacing. So these I held together, and that keeps a nice spacing between them. But you do need to make sure that there is space between your pieces if you are using the bonded fabric option, because the machine just needs a little bit more room between things to make sure everything gets cut properly. If you are using the Cricut Maker and the rotary blade, you don't need to leave any extra room. It'll do just fine on its own. At this point, what I like to do is go through the mats, make sure everything is laid out as I want it to be, that I can't save any materials any other way. And then I take a little sticky note and just write down how much I need of each fabric. So the brown, for example, a 3 by 3 inch square is what I need to make sure my piece is at least. That's not saying that I'm going to cut a 3 by 3 inch square and lay it on here. No, I'm going to make sure my piece is at least 3 by 3 inches, or if I'm going through my scrap pile, it gives me an idea of what I need to aim for. These are just rough numbers that will help you go to your fabrics next to get the right amount before we continue. So I have rough cut all my materials out. I'm going to take them to the ironing board and give them a quick press. Yes, I'm going to press my batting as well. It is a cotton batting, so I can use the same setting for everything. If you have a polyester batting, you may want to turn it down a bit. Okay, my fabric is ironed, so let's get it on the mats. I'm going to be putting more than one fabric on each mat, just so I have fewer mats to cut in the end. If we look at the 3 mats, you can see things are not perfect. This white is not all the way up to the top edge. These are not all the way over to this front edge. That's okay, because I'm going to go back into Cricut Design Space, because I've moved things around, and I'm going to take care of those adjustments. It is easier to try to adjust it there than it is to get your pieces of fabric exactly the right size and exactly the right place. It's easier to move it there. Now that your fabric is on the mats, let's go back into Design Space and make any edits that we need to where stuff is. 1, my medium green mat, we don't need to mess with that at all. My white mat. It is pretty good, but I should pull things down from the top edge because it did not line up very well. Next up, we have the red. I actually have decided not to cut this with the machine because it's oversized on purpose, and I don't really need to because I cut it close enough. So we're going to hide that. Next up, we have this little brown chunk. Well, I have a mat that has 3 different fabrics on it, so let's figure out what goes where. I'm using the move feature here to move things from one mat to another to build the mats I have in front of me. So I am ready to cut. So I'm going to press continue. It's going to connect to my Cricut Maker. Then I am going to select my material. Muslin is a very common setting to use. Calico, linen, they're all very similar. Muslin is a little bit thinner. Let's go grab a different one. You can go down here to see all your fabric options, and cotton, which is kind of a weird way to put it, but cotton, they mean quilter's cotton, but calico is pretty close to that. Okay, and it wants me to use my rotary blade. Awesome, that is what I was hoping for. And you can see I'm down to 3 mats, just like I wanted to be. And now for the satisfying peel. And now we're going to take all the pieces and put them in order. I printed this off. D is dark, M medium, L light. This is just the image that is included. So I have this pretty old and beat up standard mat here. It has a little grip left. But this is a great time to use that mat that you just haven't wanted to throw away. You can use it to hold your pieces still while we're working. So it might look pretty rough, but that's the layout. The first thing we need to do is take these triangles that make a square, and we need to pair them together so that we have all squares here instead of triangles and squares. To do that, you are simply going to fold one on top of the other so that the edges line up, and then you can pin or clip them into place and take them to the machine. I have all my triangles paired up, and this is the stuff that's just going to stay while we go sew these. Now we're going to sew those triangles together. I'm going to start by using this extra piece of fabric. It's called the leader. I'm going to sew all the way off it to start with so that I can check my stitch.
Knowing that your stitch is good is going to save you a lot of trouble later on. Take a look at it, top and bottom, make sure the stitches are nice and that the thread meets nicely between the layers. That means you have good tension. Once you know you have a good stitch, let's start sewing. We're going to sew all the way to the edge of our leader, and this just helps the edge of our pieces not get tucked underneath the machine. It's a common thing that can happen when you're piecing, and it's one way to solve it. This pattern has a 1/4 inch seam allowance built right in. So check the edge of your foot to see if it's a 1/4 inch, and if not, see if you have a different foot in your machine that has that 1/4 inch edge. I'm just going to go straight on to my next piece. It's called chain piecing or chain sewing, and it makes it so much easier to start the next one, and it saves thread in the end. I'm using a fresh size 12 needle in my machine and Gutermann all-purpose thread. A great rule in quilting is always press your seam before you sew across it. We're going to be sewing across this seam in the next step because we're going to be putting our triangles together, so it's time to press them. We want to make sure that we press our seam allowances to the dark fabric, and that's so it doesn't show through the lighter fabric. So just lay your pieces down and press them. We have all of the little pieces that we've ironed, so I'm just going to chop them apart quickly, and then we're going to put them back on our project board. So now that we're just working with squares and a couple of rectangles, we're going to start making pairs so that we can sew them together. So I flip these together, and then my pin is going to go on the side that I'm actually sewing. If a clip would be easier for you, go with that. I just want to make sure we are always marking where that we're going to sew next and what pieces are going to be sewn together. Okay, our puzzle is back together, and now we're going to pair things again. Take my top row right on top of each other. Make sure you are putting your pin on the side of the project that you want to sew. Otherwise, you may end up sewing a different bit together. Off to the sewing machine we go. All the rows are done. Now we're going to press. So you may notice as I'm opening this up that those points do not match. This is your chance to decide whether you care. If that bugs you, now's the time to go fix it. Let's start with this one. We want those seam allowances here to head towards our dark fabric. This one, it doesn't matter which way you go. You could even just press it open if you prefer. So what we're going to do again is pair them up and sew them together, and then we'll take both tops, pair them up, and sew them together. Once we get to this point, the goal is just to get it to be as flat and smooth as we can. So you've done everything you can up to this point to try to do that, and now we're going to just iron it and make it work. If you have seams that want to go a certain way, just let them go that way. It'll help everything be flat. Now that our project is flat, it's time to actually quilt it. You think we already did, right? But what we've done right now is pieced it. What we need to do is add our backing and our batting and then our pieced tree. And all of those layers are going to be quilted together. That's the actual quilting of it. Theoretically, your tree should be centered in the middle of your batting and your backing, but as long as it goes around all the sides and you have coverage, it's good to go. Next, you want to make sure that it's not going to move while you're doing your quilting. It sticks pretty well in place with this cotton batting, but it never hurts to stick some pins in or use a spray basting material. We are doing machine quilting today. I have provided you the outline of a pattern of what I am doing for the quilting, but you can really do whatever you want. I know that seems like big and crazy, like anything I want, but seriously, you could do swirls, you could do zigzags, you could not quilt it at all. It's really up to you. We are going to stitch in the ditch roughly all the way around our project. There are tools to help you go more straight. The best tool would probably be going slower, but that is not my forte. Now we are going to echo it. I'm going to line up this side of my foot with my design. And so when I get into these corners, I'm going to stop before I get to the corner. I'm going to turn, and here I have to go past the corner and even off my project, and that is absolutely fine.
I am going to continue on with the same theme that we've already done. I am going to echo it. It's not a coaster yet, but we're getting there. So I have done all my quilting. I have pressed it really nicely and flat, and now it's time to trim it up.
Enjoy this out of focus trimming montage where I evaluate how big the block ended up and trim it to roughly square using the smallest dimension.
Ta-da! Can you leave it like this? If you wanted to sew around the edges with a zigzag to hold all the layers together, yes, you may leave it like this. But we should probably finish it properly for the fun of it. If you are making the larger pillow option, everything works the exact same way until you're at this point where you need to decide whether it's going to be finished like this, having a binding around it, or whether it's going to become a pillow.
If you are going to bind your project, you're going to follow the same instructions that are coming up for that. And if you want to make a pillow, follow these next instructions.
For the pillow version, there are 2 larger rectangles that get cut, and these will overlap in the back to make an opening for a pillow form to go through. So let me show you how this goes on. We have our finished block here that has been quilted to death.
Now we're going to layer the 2 rectangle pieces on top of the pillow base. Right sides together, one on top of the other.
Then you are going to pin or clip around it as desired, and then just sew a complete square around it. Once you've sewn all the way around, you are going to flip it right side out.
Now we're jumping back to the option where you're going to finish the edges with a binding. So you have our binding pieces, and then we are going to cross them so they overlap kind of in a V, and then we're going to sew the ends of those so you end up with one very long strip. When you open up that seam you just made, the strip is in a long straight line. Now we're going to press. First, the seams that we just sewed, and then we are going to fold it in half, hot dog style, to make our binding. Next, we're going to trim the end of our binding and fold it over and give it a good press. This is going to be the clean edge that the end of our binding is going to go into once we get all the way around the pot holder.
I'm going to place this here and my binding on top of it. I am going to skip the beginning of my binding because the end is going to have to go into there. So starting a little ways down, I am going to sew, and I'm going to sew all the way to 1/4 of an inch from the edge here. So where I've stuck my pin. So once I get to my pin, I'm going to back stitch a few steps, cut my threads, and I'm going to turn the whole thing. Then my binding is going to go away from me, creating this beautiful diagonal. And then my binding goes towards me, and we're going to line up all those edges. It doesn't look like a pretty mitered corner because it's hidden under here. So we have that hidden miter underneath. Everything's where it needs to be. And then we start from this edge and sew our way down to 1/4 of an inch from the end of where we're sewing again.
That process gets repeated until you've done all your corners. Then you're going to trim the binding short enough to tuck inside that finished edge. Now you're going to sew all the way around that outside edge.
Now it's time to flip our binding to the back. I'm not a huge clip lover, but this is a perfect spot for clips. On the back, we end up with kind of like this bowl shape. And in each one of these edges, you're going to add a clip or 2 to help hold everything in place. And on the corners, we have to decide which way it's going to go. And I'm going to lay it all the way one way and then fold over with the other edge. And it will also make a beautiful mitered corner if you get everything to lay flat. And if you don't get beautiful mitered corners, guess what? This is the back. So unless you have friends that come over and look at the back of your coasters, don't put these out when that one comes over. And then we pop this around to the front, and each one of these has a little miter. So what it's time to do now is finally like the very last step. We are going to stitch in the ditch here to hold this down. Or you can hand stitch along the edge here, just catching the backing so it doesn't show on the front.
It never hurts to give your project one last press, especially if your iron's still on. It just gives it that last finished bit. I like pressing both sides. Then plop it on your table and enjoy a lovely cup of safety pins.
Thank you for joining me today for this Cricut quilting project. I look forward to seeing the evergreen trees that you make. Don't forget to post them in the group, or you can always find me, the Fabric Ninja Sewing Circle, on Facebook. Don't forget that by signing up for my newsletter, you can get the maple leaf pattern that's back here on the shelf. I have 4 different leaf colorways, and you can use these colorways in either the large pillow or coasters, so you can have every color of fall represented in your home. If you're ready to learn more about using your Cricut for quilting, head over to my website and check out the different resources that I have. I have different quilting patterns that you can download that are already set up for the Cricut. And I also have like a primer on how to get started with Cricut quilting and more information about quilting so that you can learn about quilting and learn about how to do it better with your Cricut. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Alice the Fabric Ninja. Happy sewing.